Every year, millions of people ask the same question: should I rent or should I buy a home? And depending on who you ask, you'll get two completely different answers. Some people will tell you that renting is just throwing money away. Others will argue that buying a home is one of the biggest financial mistakes you can make. Both sides sound convincing, but here's the problem. Most of these arguments compare the wrong numbers. People compare a monthly rent payment to a monthly mortgage payment without realizing that those two numbers are measuring completely different things. A mortgage payment is not the true cost of owning a home, and rent is not the only cost of renting. So today, instead of asking, should you rent or buy, we're going to ask a much better question. What is the real monthly cost of owning a home in 2026? Because once you know that number, the answer becomes surprisingly simple. Buying a home has always been considered one of the biggest financial milestones in life. For decades, owning a house represented stability, success, freedom, and for many families, it was the American dream. But the housing market of 2026 doesn't look anything like it did 10 or even 5 years ago. Mortgage rates remain much higher than they were during the pandemic. Home prices are still elevated in many cities. Insurance costs continue to rise. Property taxes have increased in numerous states. Meanwhile, rent prices have also climbed, which leaves millions of people wondering, am I making a huge mistake by renting? Or am I about to overpay for a house? The internet doesn't exactly make this decision easier. You'll find thousands of videos saying buying is always better, and thousands more saying rent forever. The truth is that neither of those statements is always correct. Whether renting or buying is the better financial decision depends almost entirely on one thing: the actual cost, not the emotional cost, not what your parents think, not what your coworkers tell you, not what social media says, the real financial cost. And that's exactly what we're going to calculate today. Let's imagine two people. Sarah rents an apartment, David buys a house. Sarah pays $2,300 every month in rent. David pays $2,300 every month for his mortgage. At first glance, they seem to be spending exactly the same amount. Most people would immediately say David is building equity while Sarah is throwing money away. But that comparison leaves out almost everything that actually matters, because David isn't just paying a mortgage. He's also paying property taxes, home insurance, maintenance, repairs, closing costs, opportunity cost, and interest. On the other hand, Sarah isn't just paying rent. She has flexibility. She avoids unexpected repairs. She doesn't lock hundreds of thousands of dollars into a single asset, and she may be investing the money she didn't spend on a down payment. Suddenly, the comparison isn't nearly as obvious anymore. That's why comparing only the mortgage payment to rent creates one of the biggest financial misunderstandings on the internet. Instead of comparing monthly payments, we're going to compare something much more useful: monthly ownership cost. Think of it this way. Imagine you bought a car. If someone asked, how much does it cost to own? You probably wouldn't only mention the loan payment. You'd also think about insurance, fuel, maintenance, registration, repairs, depreciation. The same logic applies to a house. A mortgage payment is only one piece of the puzzle. If we want to know whether buying or renting makes more financial sense, we first need to understand every dollar that owning a home actually costs. Once we know that, we can compare it fairly to renting. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to do this calculation for almost any home you're considering. When you strip away all the complicated terminology, owning a home really comes down to four major costs. The first is financing. Unless you're paying cash, you're borrowing money from the bank, and borrowing money costs interest. The second is ownership expenses. These include property taxes, insurance, maintenance, HOA fees, and repairs. The third is opportunity cost. This is the cost that almost nobody talks about. Every dollar you put into a down payment is a dollar that can't be invested somewhere else. That doesn't automatically make buying a bad decision, but it is a real financial cost, and ignoring it creates an incomplete comparison. And finally, there's equity. Every mortgage payment slowly increases your ownership of the property. Unlike rent, part of your payment may eventually become your own wealth. Understanding how these four pieces interact is the key to making a smart decision. But before we calculate everything, there's one misconception we need to clear up first. You've probably heard this phrase before: rent is throwing money away. It sounds logical. After all, once you pay rent, that money is gone forever. But let's think about something else. If you own a home, does every dollar you spend come back to you? Not even close. Property taxes don't. Insurance doesn't. Maintenance doesn't. Interest payments don't. If your roof suddenly needs replacing, that money is gone. If your water heater breaks, that money is gone too. In other words, home ownership also includes expenses you'll never recover. The goal isn't to prove renting is better or buying is better. The goal is to figure out which option causes less money to permanently leave your pocket while still helping you build long-term wealth. And that's where the math starts getting interesting. To keep things simple, we're going to use the same example throughout this video. Imagine a home worth $500,000. We'll assume a 20% down payment, a 30-year fixed mortgage, typical property taxes, average maintenance costs, current mortgage rates for 2026. If your situation is different, that's perfectly fine. The percentages may change, but the framework we're building today works for almost any property. And once you understand it, you'll never have to rely on generic advice from the internet again, because instead of asking, should people rent or buy, you'll be able to ask, should I rent or buy? And that's the only question that actually matters. Now that we've established what we're trying to calculate, let's start with the biggest expense most homeowners ever face: the mortgage. For our example, we're buying a home worth $500,000. We'll assume a fairly common scenario, a 20% down payment. That means you're putting down $100,000 up front and borrowing the remaining $400,000 from the bank. Now, in 2026, mortgage rates have come down slightly from their recent highs, but they're still nowhere near the ultra-low rates people enjoyed just a few years ago. For this example, let's assume a 6.5% fixed interest rate on a 30-year mortgage. At that rate, your monthly mortgage payment for principal and interest comes out to roughly $2,528 per month. Most people stop right here. They compare that payment to nearby rental prices and immediately decide whether buying is better. But this number is incredibly misleading because not all of that money is actually a cost. Part of every payment reduces your loan balance. That's called principal. And unlike interest, principal isn't disappearing forever. It's slowly becoming your ownership in the home. Interest, however, is money paid to the bank. You'll never see that money again. So if we're trying to calculate the real cost of owning, interest matters far more than principal. That's our first important distinction. The second expense is one every homeowner knows and nobody enjoys paying: property taxes. No matter how much equity you build, your local government still expects its share every year. Property tax rates vary depending on where you live. Some states charge less than 0.5%. Others exceed 2%. For our example, we'll use an average rate of roughly 1.1% on a $500,000 home, and that's approximately $5,500 every year, or around $458 every month. Unlike principal, this money never comes back. Whether your home doubles in value or falls in price, property taxes remain a permanent ownership expense. Next comes homeowner's insurance. This is another expense many first-time buyers underestimate. Insurance protects your home against fires, like storms, theft, and many unexpected events. Again, prices vary dramatically depending on your location. Someone living in Florida may pay several times more than someone living in the Midwest. For simplicity, let's assume an annual insurance premium of $2,000 per year. That works out to approximately $167 every month. Not the largest expense, but definitely not one you can ignore. Now let's talk about the expense almost everyone forgets: maintenance. Roofs don't last forever. Air conditioners fail. Water heaters leak. Driveways crack. Paint fades. Appliances eventually stop working. The difference between renting and owning is that when something breaks in a rental, you call the landlord. When something breaks in your own house, you become the landlord. Financial planners often recommend budgeting between 1% and 2% of your home's value every year for maintenance. Some years, you'll spend almost nothing. Other years, you might suddenly need a $12,000 roof replacement. To keep things realistic, let's use 1% annually. For our $500,000 home, that's another $5,000 every year, or roughly $417 every month. Notice something interesting. We've already added almost $1,000 per month to the mortgage payment, and we haven't even talked about one of the biggest hidden costs yet. Imagine this: you have $100,000 saved for a down payment. You buy the house. That money instantly becomes equity. Sounds great, but here's the question almost nobody asks: what could that $100,000 have done somewhere else? This is called opportunity cost. Let's imagine instead you invested that money into a diversified portfolio tracking the stock market. Historically, the US stock market has averaged around 8 to 10% annually over long periods. Of course, future returns aren't guaranteed. Some years are positive, some years are negative, but over decades, that's been the historical trend. Let's use a conservative assumption of 8% 5%. That means your $100,000 could potentially generate around $8,000 annually before compounding. Now, does that automatically mean renting is better? Not necessarily, because homes can also appreciate in value. Real estate builds equity. It provides stability. And unlike stocks, it gives you a place to live. The point isn't that opportunity cost makes buying bad. The point is simply that it's a real financial cost, and leaving it out creates an incomplete comparison. So far, our annual ownership costs look something like this: mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, opportunity cost. Some of these numbers change over time. Some depend on where you live, but together they paint a much more accurate picture than simply looking at the mortgage payment. And suddenly, so while buying doesn't look nearly as cheap as it first appeared, but before you panic, there's something extremely important we haven't talked about yet, because owning a home isn't only about expenses, it also creates value. Like every single month, part of your payment increases your ownership. Your home may appreciate, your debt gradually shrinks. And over decades, those two forces can become incredibly powerful. So before we compare renting against buying, we need to understand exactly what buying gives you in return, because only then can we make a fair comparison. Now imagine two people, both spend roughly $3,500 every month. Person A rents, person B owns. At first, their monthly spending looks almost identical, but after 10 years, their financial positions might be completely different. The renter still has flexibility. Perhaps they invested aggressively. Perhaps they moved cities for better jobs. The homeowner, on the other hand, now owns a meaningful percentage of a property that may have increased in value. Neither outcome is automatically better. It depends entirely on what happened during those 10 years. Did home prices rise? Did investments outperform? Did one person relocate several times? Did expensive repairs erase years of appreciation? This is why there isn't a universal answer. There are only different scenarios, and that's exactly what we'll compare next. Because once we put renting and buying side by side, the decision becomes much clearer than most people realize. At this point, we've broken down the major costs of owning a home: mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, opportunity cost. And while those expenses are real, buying also gives you something that renting never does: ownership. Every month, a portion of your mortgage payment slowly becomes equity. Your loan balance gets smaller, your ownership gets larger, and over time, if the property appreciates, your net worth can grow significantly. So instead of asking which option costs less, let's ask a better question. Which option leaves you financially stronger 10 years from now? The answer depends almost entirely on your situation. Imagine you've just accepted a new job. You're moving to a new city. You think you'll probably stay there for about 3 years. Should you buy? Probably not. Here's why. Buying a house isn't free. Besides your down payment, you'll likely pay closing costs when you purchase. Then when you eventually sell, you'll pay agent commissions, legal fees, moving costs, and possibly capital gains taxes depending on your situation. Those transaction costs alone can easily add up to tens of thousands of dollars. If you only stay in the home for 2 or 3 years, there simply may not be enough time for appreciation and equity to outweigh those expenses. In this case, renting often gives you something incredibly valuable: flexibility. You aren't tied to one location. You can move for a better job, a better neighborhood, or simply because your life changes. Sometimes the best financial decision isn't the one that earns the highest return. It's the one that gives you the greatest freedom. Now imagine something different. You just started a family. Your children will attend nearby schools. Your career is stable. You don't expect to move anytime soon. Now the equation changes, because every year you stay, your transaction costs get spread across a longer period. Your mortgage balance slowly decreases, your equity grows, and your home has more time to appreciate. Historically, real estate has rewarded patience, not because prices always go up, but because time allows homeowners to ride through market cycles. If you remain in the property long enough, buying often becomes much more attractive financially, not because the monthly payment is lower, but because time finally begins working in your favor. Ironically, the biggest financial mistake isn't renting, and it isn't buying. It's buying the wrong house. Many people ask, how much house can the bank approve me for? That's the wrong question. Banks care whether you can make the payment. They don't necessarily care whether the payment leaves you enough money to invest, save, travel, or enjoy life. Just because the bank approves you for an $850,000 mortgage doesn't mean it's a smart financial decision. The better question is, how much home allows me to continue building wealth? There's a huge difference. One maximizes debt, the other maximizes financial freedom. Money isn't just about numbers, it's also about behavior. Some people genuinely sleep better knowing they own the roof over their heads. They love decorating, renovating, planting trees, building something that's theirs, those emotional benefits have real value. You can't put them neatly into a spreadsheet. On the other hand, some people hate being tied down. They love changing cities, traveling, taking career opportunities across the country. For them, renting provides something equally valuable: freedom. Neither personality is wrong. The important thing is recognizing what kind of life you're actually trying to build, not simply following what everyone else is doing. You'll often hear people say, just rent and invest the difference. Mathematically, that can absolutely work, but there's one important catch. You actually have to invest it, not spend it, not upgrade your lifestyle, not let it slowly disappear into food delivery, shopping, and subscriptions. If renting saves you $800 every month and you faithfully invest that money for 20 years, there's a very good chance you'll build substantial wealth. But if that extra cash simply disappears every month, then renting loses one of its biggest financial advantages. Buying forces many people to save because every mortgage payment builds equity. Renting requires discipline. Neither strategy works without consistency. One question always comes up: should I wait for home prices to fall? The honest answer is nobody knows. People have been predicting housing crashes for decades. Sometimes they're right. Most of the time, they're early. Trying to perfectly time the housing market is remarkably similar to trying to perfectly time the stock market. Almost nobody consistently succeeds. If you're financially prepared, buying a reasonably priced home you can comfortably afford is usually far more important than buying at the perfect moment. The same principle applies to investing. Time in the market usually beats trying to time the market. After everything we've covered today, here's the conclusion. Rent if you expect to move within the next 5 years, you value flexibility, you aren't financially ready for unexpected repairs, buying would consume nearly all of your savings. Buy if you plan to stay for many years, your finances are stable, you have an emergency fund, the monthly costs comfortably fit your budget, you want the long-term benefits of ownership. Notice something. None of those reasons mention social pressure, because your decision shouldn't depend on what your friends are doing or what strangers online say. It should depend on your numbers. The biggest lesson isn't that renting is better, and it isn't that buying is better. The biggest lesson is that financial decisions become much easier once you understand the math behind them. Emotion often tells us to buy because everyone else is buying, or rent because we're afraid of commitment. Math removes emotion. Math doesn't care about headlines. Math doesn't care about trends. Math simply tells you what each choice costs. And once you understand those costs, you're free to make the decision that best fits your own life. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to Lully Wealth, because every week we break down complex financial topics into simple visual explanations that anyone can understand.